We'd like to congratulate all our seniors. If you know any of our seniors, go ahead and shoot them a text, give them a call at some point, or send them a congratulatory meme or GIF or something like that. Make sure that they know you love them. If you're a graduating senior watching this, we're proud of you too. And we want you to know that this is an incredible milestone achievement. I know our parents are proud of our seniors, and we're proud of you guys too. This is a time of incredible transition that you're going to be learning so many new things. You're going to be exposed to so many new things, and you're going to be asking all kinds of different questions and things like that. And some of those questions are something like, who am I? Or as you look into the future, look into the next semester of your education, look into that future career, you'll be asking, well, who am I going to be? Or who should I be? And those questions are central to our identity. Our identities are made up of so many different aspects that the complete fullness of our lived experience. And so they're very multifaceted identities. And I'm not talking about multiple personalities like the guy from Split and Glass who had 25 different personalities and it was so complicated. I'm not talking about that. I'm not talking about multiple personalities. I'm talking about a multifaceted identity. For example, myself. There's lots of things that make me who I am, and they have to do with all the different areas of my lived experience. For example, I'm a father and a husband. I'm a white man with all the privilege that comes with that, and I'm a Christian and so on. We all have various communities and groups that we're tied to that make up our identities as individuals, but some of those things are like racial and ethnic identity, sexual and gender identity, political and religious identity, your generational identification, your birth order, and so much more. But if you notice those things that I last listed, they relate not only to you as an individual and to me as an individual, but they relate to the people that surround us, the communities that we're a part of and that we live within. We have communal identity, and it's that communal identity that I want to pursue today. It's how God's people have wrestled with and developed an understanding of the communal human identity. For both Jews and Christians, that communal identity is laid out in the form of a cosmogony. And it's okay if you don't know that word, cosmogony. It's not one that we throw around all the time. It's simply an event of initial cosmic ordering. It's a story that defines the world as we know it, or defines how we understand the world that we live within. In Genesis 1, we're introduced to how the ancient Israelites imagined the structuring of the cosmos. And we don't necessarily view that the same as they did. Sometimes we might view it something like this. This is a map of the observable universe. We call the cosmos the universe these days. And so you might think of it like this, or you might think of it as like we're taught about it in school, something more like this, or you might prefer to think about it more like the earth, the vantage point with which we have, or the structure of the earth, or you might just prefer not to think about that kind of stuff at all and go to Middle Earth. Or maybe you think about our position here, and when you see the universe, you think of the night sky and all the stars that make up the universe. Or if you go to the movies, you think about the Marvel Cinematic Universe, or maybe you don't think of any of that kind of stuff and you just want to think about Converse. But it doesn't really matter, because Genesis 1 isn't describing any of that stuff. And that's for a good reason. It says Genesis 1 sets the stage for the rest of the story that follows in the Bible. It's the backdrop of the stage of a grand play that is seen through the story of history. It holds the story Genesis 1 does. It's the backdrop, and it gives the story a framework within which the story can be told. But it's never really directly referenced after any action is taken within it. It sets the scene. And Genesis 1 is special because that scene that's set, Genesis 1, is a temple inauguration text. You see, all those pictures that we saw earlier are kind of how we view the universe and how we view the cosmos, but what they would have imagined may have been something more like this. It's a bit different. But let's go through what we see in this temple inauguration text in Genesis 1. So in the beginning, when God created the heavens and the earth, we have God, we have darkness, we have this void, and we have God's Spirit mixing up these cosmic primeval waters. And that's all there is. And then God says, let there be light. And you have darkness and light separated from one another, and the order begins. We begin the structuring of the house that God's building. And then on day 2, he separates the water. You remember that water that God's Spirit was brooding over, mixing up and churning up. God separated it so that there's water above and that there's water below. And in the middle, there's this expanse. He calls it the sky. And so God, in these first 2 days, has made room for things to exist within his house. And on the third day, that he pushes aside that lower water and allows that to produce land, dry area for things to live on. And so he calls those waters that he pushed aside the sea, and he calls the dry part land, and the land then produces vegetation. In the first 3 days, God has set up the framework, the skeletal structure of the house that he's building, of his cosmic temple. And then the next 3 days, 4, 5, 6, he starts to fill the house. He's made room for everything that he's going to put in it. He's made the framework by putting up those pillars of land, by pushing aside the water, by separating the waters, and by setting aside darkness and light. And now he's going to start filling it. So on day 4, he puts lights up in his house. He has the greater light that governs the day. He has the lesser light that governs the night. And then he has stars. And on day 5, he puts into that expanse that he had called skies, he puts birds and things that fly. And he puts in the waters that he pushed aside, the waters below, he puts all kinds of living creatures that live within those waters, and things like fish. And then on day 6, he populates that land area, that dry area that he pushed the waters below off of. He puts all kinds of animals, wild and domesticated, onto the land. And then he puts humans there. And he gives those humans a role. He gives them a task. He said, you are the rulers of this creation. Everything that I've made, it's yours. And the 7th day, this is the most important day, and one way that we know that it is God's cosmic temple, because God stops working and he rests. You see, God rests in the temple. That's what gods do in temples. They come, they chill, they relax, they live there, and they have restful time. God rests in his temple. He dwells there, and he made the humans. He gave them an identity as rulers of his cosmic temple. You see, the Israelite temple, the Temple of Solomon, was set up to emulate and remind you of God's cosmic temple. So, if you can see this, we have this large basin right here that's filled with water. It looks small here, but it's really big. This represents the cosmic waters, and there's 4 creatures that are under it. They're not in this picture, but they're holding up this basin where they represent the 4 living creatures that represent all living creatures of creation. They're holding up the cosmic waters that God has contained. And then over here, you have these other like washing stations, sort of, and they kind of represent that split and the waters. And then you have, if you go into this next court, you have like the pillars of the cosmos, and there's so much more. The menorah inside this next level represents that greater light that governs the day, and so on. And so God sets up humanity and makes them priests in God's cosmic temple. That's our identity. We are priests in God's cosmic temple. And it's a multifaceted identity, but who cares, right? What's it mean to have that identity? What are we supposed to do with that? Even if I know that I'm a priest in God's cosmic temple, what am I supposed to make out of that? Well, we're Christians. We claim to follow Christ. So let's go to Jesus. In Luke 10, Jesus has sent out his disciples to various areas around Galilee, and they're to go to different cities to teach and to perform miracles. And Jesus said, don't take any money with you, don't take any provisions or food with you, just live off of the generosity of others, and in return give generously back to them out of what you have, the teachings that I've given you. Do miracles, do healings and things like that. And it's in the midst of all this activity that an expert in the religious law comes up to Jesus and asks him a question. This is Luke chapter 10, starting in verse 25. Now an expert in religious law stood up to test Jesus, saying, Teacher, what must I do to inherit eternal life? He said to him, What is written in the law? How do you understand it? The expert answered, Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, and with all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. And Jesus said to him, You have answered correctly. Do this and you'll live. But the expert, wanting to justify himself, you see, this expert wasn't satisfied with answering his own question. He was trying to trap Jesus in something and trying to get him to make a misstep or misspeak. And so he's got to try to probe into what Jesus has said is the correct answer. And he's a lawyer, so he's going to parse terms. So the lawyer says, And who is my neighbor? And Jesus replied. He's going to tell him a story. In response to that question, Jesus tells this story that many of us are familiar with. And if you're not familiar with, well, here it goes. A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho and fell into the hands of robbers, who stripped him, beat him up, and went off, leaving him half dead. Now by chance, a priest was going down the road, but when he saw the injured man, he passed by on the other side. So too a Levite, when he came up to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan, who was traveling, came to where the injured man was, and when he saw him, he felt compassion for him. He went up to him and bandaged his wounds, pouring olive oil and wine on them. Then he put him on his own animal, brought him to an inn, and took care of him. The next day he took out 2 silver coins and gave them to the innkeeper, saying, Take care of him, and whatever else you spend, I will repay you when I come back this way. Which of these 3 do you think became a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of the robbers? The expert in religious law said, The one who showed mercy to him. So Jesus said to him, Go and do the same. See, there's some things we need to know about this story. The expert in the law that's talking to Jesus, he's a Jew. Jesus is also a Jew. The main character in this story is a Samaritan. Jews and Samaritans do not like each other. And it goes beyond that. It's more than they don't like each other. It's that they are really, really uncomfortable with each other. They've been feuding for generations and generations, and they hate each other. And this is the guy that Jesus puts into the story and does the right thing. He puts in the person that expert in the law would be the most uncomfortable with. He's so uncomfortable with him that when he answers Jesus' question at the end, who would be the neighbor? The expert in the law can't even say the character that was in the story. He said the one who showed mercy. He can't even say that it was a Samaritan. That's how uncomfortable he is with Samaritans. So who makes you the most uncomfortable? Seniors. Is it that teacher that's been constantly at your back who you just can't seem to get a break from? Is it maybe the far right? Maybe it's older people who make you feel judged all the time. The rest of you, who makes you the most uncomfortable? Is it the LGBTQ community? Maybe it's liberals in general. Maybe it's socialists. Maybe it's Black Lives Matter. I don't know. Who makes you the most uncomfortable? Because that's who Jesus would insert into this story if he was telling it to you and say, that person took care of the person in need and showed them love. Thus, that person is the neighbor. Jesus flips that question that the expert in the law asks on its head. So when he says, who's my neighbor? Jesus says, maybe you should be asking who needs love. Who should I be responsible for? And it's that person in need. And the person who is a neighbor, it doesn't matter what group they're a part of, the person who is a neighbor is a person who meets the need. What's it look like to be a priestly ruler in God's cosmic temple? You know, there's a connection between this story and many different passages in the Old Testament. Jesus knew his scripture really well. One thing that this story reminds me of is the wisdom literature. The opening chapter of Proverbs sounds a lot like the opening piece of Jesus' story. In Jesus' story, you have this gang that comes and takes advantage of this guy. They take everything that he has, they beat him, and they leave him for dead. In Proverbs, a father figure is talking to a younger man, and he's going to try to distinguish between living wisely and living unwisely. And the father figure says, there's going to be these people that they make you feel really good. They're really enticing. They have a good time. They offer you things that are going to make you feel good and maybe help you get ahead in life. And the thing is, those people are offering you those things, but they don't have the right to offer it to you because they gained them unjustly. And those people are going to ask you into their group, and they're going to make you feel like you have a part, like you can be part of what they're doing, like you can be part of their identity. And they're going to ask you to do different things, such as taking advantage of someone, taking what's theirs and using it as yours, and then beating them and leaving them on the side of the road for dead. The end of this example in Proverbs 1 ends in almost the exact same way as this story that Jesus tells begins. And this enticing of someone to live unwisely, to do the unneighborly thing, because it just like feels attractive, and it can become like, these are my people and that's what I should do because that's what they're doing type of thing. It's common. It reminds me of another story even further back. In Genesis 4, we have two brothers. Their names are Cain and Abel. You're probably familiar with this story. But Cain and Abel, Cain is a farmer. He takes care of crops. Abel is a shepherd, and he takes care of sheep. And on the day when it comes to offer sacrifices, they both go to make a sacrifice. And God prefers Abel's sacrifice to Cain's. And we could talk about maybe, why that is, but that's not really the point. The point is Cain gets angry, Cain gets jealous, and Cain acts like the unwise person in the proverb. And he takes advantage of his brother. He manipulates him and takes him out into a field and kills him. And then God comes and talks to Cain. God asks Cain, he says, "Where's your brother?" Cain says, "Am I my brother's keeper?" Am I my brother's guardian? Like, am I really responsible for somebody else's well-being? And the assumed answer in the story is yes, he is. And that's why it's so tragic what Cain does. Because he was supposed to be there taking care of his brother. He was supposed to be there looking after the well-being of his brother. And instead, he takes advantage of him and kills him. Essentially, Cain's question and the expert in the law's question are the same. The question posed to Jesus, who is my neighbor? Like who do I have to love? Who do I really have to bear responsibility for? That's the same as what Cain is asking. Am I really responsible for the life of my brother? Yes. Yes, you are. What does it look like to be a priestly ruler in God's cosmic temple? Well, you remember the priest and the Levite in the story? He mentions them for a reason, because they know the law. They know what they should be doing, and then they don't do it. He mentions them because the person he's talking to is an expert in the law. They know the law. They know this book of Levitical instruction, the book of the Levites, Leviticus, and they know what it says, and that's why the expert in the law is able to answer Jesus so easily when he says, well, what do you think is the most important thing that you could be doing? What do you think it takes to inherit eternal life? And he says, love God and love your neighbor, obviously. Why is that so easy for them to answer? Because it's in the book, it's in the Levitical book that they're going off of, Leviticus chapter 19, verse 18, which says, love your neighbor as yourself. And it's not a mystery in this book, like in this chapter, what you're supposed to be doing in order to love your neighbor as yourself. He gives very, very, very specific examples. Like, it's not left for you to work out like as an abstract idea, what is love? What does it look to love a neighbor as myself? No, like it gives you instructions. Some of those things are things like being very hospitable, like immensely hospitable to those people who would come into your country, and you are to welcome them and make them feel a part of who you are. There's another instruction where if you're a farmer and you've planted things, you harvest, right? But you're not supposed to harvest everything that you've planted. Instead, you leave some of your product. You leave some of what you've worked so hard to yield. You leave that out there so that others can take it freely and meet their own needs and use it as they freely please. You're supposed to love your neighbor as yourself by doing those two things. You're also supposed to love your neighbor as yourself by protecting women from sexual abuse and assault, whether they're inside your household or outside your household. These are the kinds of things that Leviticus 19 is telling you to give you an example of what it looks like to love your neighbor as yourself. Jesus told the story that he told to the expert in the law because he is exploring that multifaceted identity of being a priestly ruler in God's cosmic temple. We have like 66 books in the Bible, right? And they're all aiming at how are we to be priestly rulers in God's cosmic temple. And so Jesus puts a lot of those pieces together in this story. And in order to answer that question, what does it look like to be a priestly ruler in God's cosmic temple? Jesus says, you love your neighbor as yourself, and thus you love the Lord your God with all you are. Love God and love your neighbor. That's what it means to be a priestly ruler in God's cosmic temple. And who's your neighbor? It's that person that you're most uncomfortable, but it's also that person that needs love. That person that's been taken advantage of. They need the love of a neighbor. They need you to be a neighbor. And you can be as uncomfortable with these people as you want to be, but your job is to be a priest in God's cosmic temple and show them that love, meet the need, be a neighbor. So if you're a senior that's graduated and you're studying for your exams or whatever, like, you should be asking yourself in all the aspects of who I am, what I'm doing right now, studying, how am I going to use these studies to love my neighbor and thus love God? If I'm setting out on a new career track, how am I going to use that career to love God and love my neighbor? Because all the aspects of our identity, every different aspect of our lives is to be directed at being priestly rulers in God's cosmic temple, because that's who we were made to be. And the way we do that is by loving God, by loving our neighbor. And we're about to sing about that love. And as we sing about that love, I want you to think about, how does this love impact my identity as a priestly ruler in God's cosmic temple?